Hey there, and welcome to Explosive Enterprises. Yep, it's another 40mm shell review, and another 40Max shell, specifically the Cyclops 2. You might be thinking that we've done quite a few 40Max shell reviews, and you're right, but I promise that we've got some reviews of some other brands in the pipe, like not that one. Oh man, I swear there was a KT-40 in here somewhere. As usual, when it comes to reviews, we like to be transparent about receiving products for free from manufacturers. 40Max did send us this shell on the condition that we review it, but they don't have any editorial control over the content of the review, and anything here is 100% our own opinions. So, onto the Cyclops 2. In the box, you get the shell, oddly split into two parts in the box, and a small bag of replacement O-rings with 3 sizes of each used in the shell. As the name would imply, this is the second Cyclops shell that 40Max has developed. Both fall into a category that I'm going to officially, with all the power vested in me as an airsoft YouTuber, start referring to as coil-style shells. Coil shells are patterned on the now out of production and much maligned 40 mic and Master Mic shells from Airsoft Innovations. The key design feature that they all share is having a single barrel, and the BBs arranged in a long coil-shaped track running along the inside of the shell body. This is in contrast to standard 40mm shells, which store the BBs either in several barrels that are positioned around the outer rim of the shell, or in a large central cavity that is fitted with a plug for BB retention. The barrel on a coil shell usually runs along the entire length of the shell head, and even that short barrel dramatically changes the performance, with coil shells generally having longer ranges and tighter spreads than traditional shells. This comes at the cost of firing in a long burst instead of dumping the BBs all at once, giving coil shells a characteristic sound. Getting into the Cyclops 2 specifically, it seems pretty obvious to compare this to the first version, so let's break them down side by side. The Cyclops 2 is a gas-in base shell, meaning that the bottom portion of the shell holds all of the propellant and the firing mechanism, which allows for a bit more flexibility in terms of the design of the head or top of the shell. The downside here is that they tend to hold a bit less gas than the traditional 40mm shell design, which houses the gas in the head of the shell with the base just housing the firing mechanism. The version 1 of the Cyclops, as well as every other coil shell that we can think of, actually follows the traditional design, so it'll be interesting to see how that impacts the performance. The design of the coil itself looks quite similar to the first version, using a plastic core made of, according to 40Max, polyoxymethylene, or POM, surrounded by an outer casing of aluminum. The base of the shell, the red removable rim, and the firing mechanism are also made of aluminum. A quick aside here, when we discussed the materials composition of the first version of the shell, we noted that it would probably be a bad idea to be using high-pressure gases like CO2 in 40Max shells. Surprisingly, we actually got a bit of pushback on that, with some folks figuring that because 40Max doesn't explicitly say that you can't use CO2 in these shells, that it is safe to do so. Or, at the very least, that they do it anyway, even if it isn't the safest. To be clear, it is not safe to use CO2 or high-pressure gases in these shells, and this time around, 40Max has helpfully cleared the air by etching that onto the base. Please don't. Anyways, the Cyclops 2 holds a similar amount of BBs to the first version, at 110 compared to 115 on version 1, which makes sense since the BB tracks are pretty much the same size. Beyond that though, the design is substantially different. On the first version, BBs flow from the bottom of the shell towards the muzzle, with gas introduced at the base of the BB track, forcing them upwards and out the barrel. The Cyclops 2 operates more like the Master Mic, 40 mic, and KT-40 by feeding the BBs top down, with gas introduced at the top of the track and the BBs flowing downwards towards the base of the shell. This allows the Cyclops 2 to have roughly double the barrel length of the version 1 and makes the coil overall more compact. Speaking of the barrel, it is now the traditional circle shape and runs along the center of the shell, versus the square-shaped barrel that ran along the very edge of the version 1 shell. A much smaller O-ring is used for BB retention compared to the version 1 shell, and it is mounted right at the base of the coil to maximize the barrel length. Out of the box, this O-ring is actually covered up with a QC sticker, which implies that removing it might void some kind of warranty, though we aren't aware of 40Max actually offering one. More practically, the spare O-ring set doesn't come with a replacement for this one, and it's just sitting on this straight peg without any kind of retention channel, so it's probably best to just leave that sticker on there. To facilitate the top-down feed of this shell, a small gas tube runs parallel to the barrel and introduces the gas at the top of the BB track through this small hole. On the version 1, you don't really need a gas tube, so you just have this hole at the bottom of the track, which is connected directly to the gas reservoir. Since the gas tube is offset from the center line of the shell, a positioning hole is located on the opposite side of the barrel, which mates with a corresponding peg on the shell base to make things a little bit easier to line up. 40Max made a very wise product engineering decision here by having the positioning peg and gas connector be slightly different sizes, so you can't interchange the two accidentally. The last feature of note on the shell head is this aluminum faceplate, which has been epoxied to the plastic and contains the shell's mandatory weird 40Max party trick, a boost switch. In reality, it's actually the complete opposite of a boost. The switch works by lining up with the gas tube, and in quote, normal mode, this hole becomes visible, and allows a portion of the propellant to deliberately leak out of the gas tube before it can apply power to the BBs, which reduces the shell's performance. When in boost mode, it functions like the version 1 shell, or any other coil-style shell, by sealing the gas tube and applying as much energy as possible from the propellant gas to the BBs, giving you maximum power. It seems like a bit of misleading marketing, though I guess normal and boost probably sounded better than Super Weenie Hut Junior mode and normal mode. Seriously though, maybe CQB mode and normal mode or something would have been better? I don't know. Moving on to the base of the shell, the valve components can be accessed by removing the red base rim, as is the case with the V1 and all other 40Max shells. The valve poppet is substantially larger in diameter than what you get on the version 1, which theoretically should allow for better gas flow and higher power. However, looking at the body of the shell base, the gas is constricted through this absolutely tiny little sliver of a hole, which almost certainly offsets any other power boosts you might be getting there. Instead of increasing power, there's a pretty good chance that this change to the poppet valve design is to streamline manufacturing and reduce costs, since the entire base rim, valve trigger, and poppet valve are now identical to the ones on the 40 and other 40Max shells. Honestly, can't really fault them there, and for the end user, that means you need to keep fewer sizes of spare O-rings on hand if you have more than one type of 40Max shell. For physical characteristics, fully loaded, these shells weigh 180 grams, or 6.3 ounces, which is pretty similar to the version 1. Dimensionally, they are 43mm wide at the rim, exactly 40mm wide at the base, 39.1mm wide at the head, and are 107mm long overall, which is pretty much the same dimensions as the first version as well. Maintenance-wise, there are 3 hardened steel bearings on the poppet valve, which are 4mm in diameter should you need to order replacements. And there are 3 pressure-bearing O-rings, all located in the base of the shell. The largest O-ring seals the rim of the shell, and there are 2 smaller O-rings on the poppet valve. All of these should be lubricated regularly with your favorite type of grease. As mentioned, a bag of spare O-rings is included with the shell, 3 of each size for a total of 9. If you experience leaks on the rim of the shell, inspect the rim O-ring, which is the largest of the 3. If you experience leaks through the hole in the valve trigger, inspect the bottom O-ring on the poppet valve, which is the middle size, and if you encounter leaks out through the gas tube, which would actually manifest as gas coming out of the barrel, inspect the top O-ring on the poppet valve, which is the smallest of the 3. Like most coil shells, the Cyclops 2 can easily be loaded with a traditional speed loader, which is a big advantage over the traditional multi-barrel shells, which range between annoying and impossible to load with the same. That said, it is slightly more difficult to load than the version 1 Cyclops due to the adoption of the top-down feed, which forces you to fight against the weight of all the BBs in the track as you get close to fully loading the shell. Beyond slowing the loading process down, the top-down feed can also result in jams. These are pretty easy to fix, and you just tip the shell on its side and shake it around a bit to loosen the BBs up. Anybody familiar with the 40 Mic, Master Mic, or KT40 would be familiar with the process. Just as a side note, and this is not a sponsored endorsement or anything, the Autobot speed loaders have more than enough torque to load all of the coil shells that we have in our inventory, and do so much faster than hand loading. If you plan to use a lot of this style of shell, an Autobot would be a solid investment. On to the big question, how does it shoot? Our target is a 1 meter by 1 meter wooden pallet positioned at 25 meters, and all of our test shots are with 0.2 gram BBs. This first shot is in boost mode. The BBs stay in a roughly 6 to 8 foot pattern and don't seem to have too much trouble reaching the 25 meter target with the launcher elevated at about 10 degrees, though they do take their sweet time getting there and are definitely out of energy by the time they do. 40Max claims that the shell reaches 25 meters with ease in boost mode, and while the with ease part might be a bit of a stretch, it can definitely shoot that far. This next shot is going to be in normal mode. We've used a few 40mm shells before, and personally, I don't think that's normal. To be fair, it's a fairly cool upstate New York autumn day, and we've been firing our single test shells somewhat rapidly, so let's give it a reload and give it a chance to warm up a bit, then try again. As expected, the power and range are significantly reduced. In normal mode, 40Max claims 15 meters of range, and that seems to mostly track with our testing, though you'd have to elevate the launcher a bit to get there. Worth noting here, we consistently had about 20 BBs left in the shell after firing in normal mode, so it seems like the bypass might be letting out a bit too much gas, though we could also chalk that up to the lower ambient temperatures. It's probably worth a follow-up in the springtime. Finally, let's compare that to our version 1 Cyclops. Some interesting stuff here. The version 1 and version 2 both seem to shoot roughly the same distance, 25 to 30 meters or 75 to 100 feet, assuming you have the V2 in boost mode. The V2 maintains a tighter spread, and the BBs seem to fly in a less erratic path. Like the V1, the V2 also seems to experience the hop-up effect that most coil shells suffer from. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Finally, and probably the most noticeable difference between the two, is the power, which seems to be quite a bit lower on the V2 with a couple of effects on performance. For starters, the BBs fly at a lower velocity. It's tough to accurately chrono these shells, but based on our footage, we'd clock them both at around 100 FPS, maybe slightly slower, with the BBs taking a bit under a second to reach our 75-foot target. Certainly not devastating levels of impact energy in either case. The other effect of the lower power is that the V2 takes noticeably longer to get all of its shots off compared to the V1, even though the V1 holds a few more BBs. Slowing the footage down, the V2 takes almost 4 times as long to fully fire. We strongly suspect that this comes down to how incredibly restricted the gas flow is on this shell. This tiny little sliver between the base of the shell and the gas tube creates a bottleneck that strongly regulates the flow of gas, drawing the gas release out over a longer period and reducing the pressure which can be applied to the BBs. This effect is actually pretty easy to demonstrate. If you listen after you fire the shell, you can hear propellant gas continuing to vent from the shell well after the BBs have all been fired. And everything you hear there is basically wasted energy that wasn't applied to the BBs. Unfortunately, due to the way the gas tube is positioned relative to the base of the shell, you can't really fix this problem, since doing the obvious thing and drilling this hole out would make it so the poppet valve is no longer controlling gas flow. You'd really need to completely redesign one of the two halves to make it work properly. And just for reference, you can see that the hole through which the gas travels on the version 1 is A, complete circle, and B, quite a bit bigger overall. A lot of what we mentioned here is going to sound very familiar for anyone that has recently watched our Cyclops V1 review, since nothing that we mentioned in that review was really addressed in the version 2 of this shell, but let's go through it. While the Cyclops shells do have a range advantage over traditional shells and a tighter spread, they lack the power to really take advantage of it. With velocities hovering around 100 FPS, hitting targets at max range, especially if they're aware of you, or worse, moving, is going to be next to impossible without a lot of luck. Doubly so on the version 2 when you factor in how long it takes for all the BBs to leave the shell, which gives an opponent time to react, or for someone to shoot you while you're keeping the launcher on target. Given all that, the power levels seem to be tuned more towards CQB use, and the addition of the extra low power normal mode on the V2 kind of confirms that. But in CQB play, you again run into the issue of the time it takes for the BBs to leave the shell, and on top of that, you now have a shell that maintains a fairly tight spread at most CQB distances, which at least to me seems like a bit of a disadvantage over traditional shells, which have substantial spread, even at something like 3 to 4 meters. This shell also struggles with an issue that unfortunately seems to be inherent to all coil shells, something that we're calling the hop-up effect. Due to the way that the retention O-ring interacts with the BBs in the track as they leave the barrel, you get some backspin applied to them, much like a hop-up. If the shell is oriented with the retention O-ring on top of the BBs, as it was in all of our test footage, this is actually an advantage, as you get improved range. The problem arises when you don't have the shell perfectly lined up in the launcher. Any rotation of the shell to the left or to the right is going to cause the BBs to have a crazy left or right hook. We'll demonstrate by flipping the shell 180 degrees from the ideal orientation. Note that we did elevate the launcher here at like 30 degrees, just to make sure the BBs all made it on camera. Yep, just like every other coil shell, the BBs hop straight downwards. You can try to work around this problem by figuring out what the optimal orientation for the shell is, and then marking it in some way so that you can line it up every time. We've done this on all of our coil shells, but as we mentioned in the review of the version 1 Cyclops, loading this way takes your attention off the fight and makes reloads a lot less smooth. Another issue that we've run into since that review is that some launchers, particularly the new KT320, don't really hold shells in place that well, so they could easily rotate on their own after being loaded. So all that in mind, we have to ask ourselves, what is this shell really trying to do? For the version 1, we concluded that its niche was for mid-range shots, mid-range for a 40mm BB shell that is, so around 50 feet. Specifically ones where the target was unaware of you, and where it wouldn't make sense for you to just engage that target with your primary weapon, like if you were using a standalone launcher, for example. For the version 2, it's not really any easier to pin a use case down. You could try to exploit that long fire time to potentially engage multiple targets by sweeping your launcher across them, and maybe do it at very short range by using the shell in normal mode. But at that point, you're really starting to push the use case Venn diagrams of traditional 40mm shells and coil shells into a circle. On the other hand, as we've said before, 40mm launchers are one of the few pieces of airsoft equipment where you can rapidly change the performance of the platform by simply swapping shells. So it might actually be reasonable to carry a super niche shell with a specific use case in mind. We'll let you be the judge. As is our custom, we'll end with some high-level pros and cons. As for pros, the Cyclops is very easy to reload compared to traditional 40mm shells, as are most coil shells. The flight trajectory of the BBs is fairly flat, and there tend to be a lot fewer crazy flyers compared to the version 1 Cyclops. The lower overall power and option for an even lower power normal mode makes it very easy to set the shell up so it isn't going to hurt anyone, while maintaining that somewhat intimidating sound that you get from coil shells. As for downsides, the hop-up effect is still one of the biggest practicality hurdles for coil shells. In certain launchers, there's simply no guarantee that the shell will maintain its orientation, and thus you really don't know where your BBs are going to fly. We're starting to sound like a broken record on these 40Max reviews, but these things really could do with a bit more power. Especially on this shell, it really feels like a drag on the entire design. Finally, given the overall restrained performance of the shell, the addition of the normal switch is a bit confusing, and honestly practically bordering on a gimmick. I know we're harping on it at this point, and maybe this is really an American take, since we know that power levels are often mandated by law in countries where a lot of airsoft gear originates, but like a lot of other 40Max shells we reviewed, the Cyclops 2 feels like a really cool idea let down by just not being powerful enough. If this shell had the BB capacity and gas throughput, or hell, the ability to take high-pressure propellants like CO2, it isn't too hard to imagine something that could basically fill the roles of the 40 mic and the master mic at the same time. A shell with both a default mode that could be used at standard 40mm shell ranges without causing injury, and a boost mode for longer range situations would be a fantastic tool to have in the toolbox. But for now, that's still just one last note here, and it's a bit of a tricky topic given how annoying international shipping is right now. But as of recording in mid-November 2025, these shells are not yet available from US-based retailers, but it is available from a number of international sellers, as well as from 40Max themselves, in 1, 2, 3, or 6 packs. If you decide to order directly from 40Max, they provided us with a discount code for our viewers, which gets you 6% off your order when you enter explosive, all caps, at checkout. Full disclosure, that isn't an affiliate code or anything, so we aren't getting a commission from it or any other kind of benefit, but they probably do use that to determine how effective send free shit to YouTubers is as a marketing strategy, so there is that. If you like what we do and want to support us further, please consider checking out our merch store or our Patreon, both linked in the description text below. And as always, thanks for watching.